I'm Hannah.
I'm Laura.
And we are usually two best friends who do a deep dive into a new book series, one book at a time. But today we're three best friends because we are welcoming to the podcast RJ or Rebecca Crunden, the author of The Strange Gray Everything and more books. Welcome, Rebecca.
A zillion books.
Yeah, I actually tried to count it the other day because someone asked me offhand and they were like, how many have you done? And I'm like, oh dear, I don't actually know.
Well, according to Goodreads, like 30.
I think, well, okay, so Goodreads does include, so it's like, I think one of those is just like all the series combined. So I think I'm at like 25, 26 maybe.
Laura, how dare you get that wrong.
It's getting up there.
Pretty low number.
Which was quite fun when I was like switching them from Amazon to like other websites, and you're like, oh dear, I have to make a page for every single one.
Oh my gosh.
The worst part.
That would be a nightmare.
But out of the 26 or so books, we are discussing one of your recently published ones back in January 2025, The Strange Gray Everything. Can you tell us a little bit about the book?
So that was one I have the worst attention span. So when I get bored with one book, I will jump into another one. And that was initially supposed to be just like a novella. I fully intended it to be like 70 to 100 pages. And I was just, because I was writing a separate werewolf story, and it was more intense and epic fantasy and, you know, kind of battles and stuff. And I was like, I want to do something fun. So I sort of wrote that one to just kind of have a little fun romance story going. And then I started to really fall in love with the characters, and it got away from me a little bit. So every time I was like, okay, it's kind of 2,000 words past the novella limit. Now it's 10,000 words. And then it ended up becoming a full novel. Unintentionally. But yeah, no, I had a lot of fun with those characters. I like kind of small town stories, and I have angsty characters and everything where, you know, there's always like, you know, I like sorting with relationship problems, but I don't like, you know, cheating or those kind of storylines. So I try and come up with, you know, like, what's a justified way for someone to be kept apart for a long time? And that's where I tend to go from there. And yeah, that one got a bit bigger than I intended, but I ended up just really loving it. And some part of me is like, maybe it needs a follow-up. Who knows?
I was going to ask that too, because I was going to say, I asked Hannah before we started, like, is this a series? And she said, I don't know. And I'm like, I hope so, because I feel a little empty.
Yeah, I got to the end and I was like, okay, well, I kind of want to like keep going with Orion's story, and I kind of wanted to keep going with the school, because I sort of hinted at stuff there. And what's funny is like I have a few other stories that you could almost say would be in the same universe as it. So I do think that it's kind of like it's a complete story as is, you know, it sort of ends the guy's romance in a nice little bow. But at the same time, like I don't want to spoil anything. But there's like a sort of new hurdle that they get at the end of the book that I think could definitely have some fun magical complications in a follow-up book. So you know, and how they deal with that.
Well, like you've been hinting, this follows like two people in their 30s who fell in love in high school, and one of them attended a school that has very mysterious things happening. And they get married when they're 19, and then on the honeymoon, one of them just up and leaves the other person. And then we come back to them in their 30s, and they're kind of finding each other again through a wedding of many different things. And then lots of magical things happen afterwards.
Yes, lots of magical things. It was actually funny though, you know, because like when I think we've had changed laws for so long, it actually as I was writing it, and I was like, wait, where would they be able to get married? Like, you know, 12 years ago.
Yeah.
And so I actually, because like, you know, and I've been to Amsterdam and I love Amsterdam, but I was sitting there and I was like, I know they could do it in Amsterdam, but could they actually do it anywhere else? Because you couldn't have done it in America.
Yeah.
And you couldn't have done it in Ireland, and you couldn't have done it in England. So that one kind of threw me for a loop, because I was like halfway through the story of these, you know, married guys. And I was like, wait, hang on.
Where are they married?
Yeah, where could they have gotten married 12 years ago? So that one was kind of an interesting sort of like, oh shit moment.
My privilege is showing because I didn't even think about that. I was just like, oh wow, so it's been 12 years.
Yeah, and it's like you rewatch Modern Family and you realize like up until season 5, Mitch and Cam can't get married.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's like I lived through that. I watched that show live, but it's been so long on the other side of that kind of looking back, you go, oh damn. Yeah.
I was like in law school at the time, and I remember like we had a judge panel we were going to the next day, like as a team, and like that case came down, and then it just like ruined the whole judge panel because that was all anyone was going to talk about. So
Yeah, I was like living in Ireland when I think we were the first country to pass it by popular vote. And like the whole country just like overnight, woo, celebrating rainbows, joy. But yeah, like it's crazy to think about. So that was kind of a hurdle that I ran into with the characters because I totally just dove in and was like, they've been married for 12 years. And then I was like, oh, but can they? So yeah, it was an interesting hurdle for me. But yeah, no, I've been to Amsterdam a few times, so that was kind of a fun little, side story for them.
Beautiful.
Before we get too far into the book, can you tell us a little bit about you as a reader or maybe some like books that influenced your writing?
Ooh, I think it's no surprise that I love Tolkien. I was actually
anyone that follows you online will know this.
Yeah, and I'm not remotely subtle about it either. And that one's really funny because like my mom bought me the cassette. So again, showing my age, I'm only 32, but she bought me the cassette tapes when I was little, and I had chronic insomnia as a child, and so I would listen to Lord of the Rings on cassette tape, and just absolutely fell in love with them. Didn't understand a word. No. for a good portion of my childhood, and I was like, oh, there's dwarves and elves, but I was like so confused by it. And I listened to that, and I listened to Chronicles of Narnia. So I had quite a few cassette tapes, and then from cassette tapes I got to the CDs, and like I was an early audiobook girl, and I even wrote a little like paper on Tolkien when I was like 10 for class, and I don't know, he's always been kind of my literary dude. So definitely him. My younger books would have been like Lemony Snicket and a series of unfortunate events. Yes. And again, and you know what? He was great because I never saw his face. So, so I was like, it really helped me because I was like, as soon as I saw the author's
it's
face,
better to know very little about Lemony Snicket's real name and anything about him. Hannah and I know some information about him from interviews, and just never learn anything.
And I honestly, and like, so I loved series of unfortunate events. And I remember reading all of those the years they came out, and I loved Ava Ibbotson. She did like Island of the Aunts and Witch and all of those ones. Yeah. So those were big, and I loved Libba Bray, who did.
I love Libba Bray. Thank you so much.
She does not get enough. Like
she does not.
No, she's so underrated. And you know what's crazy to me is I remember, because I was obsessed with the Gemma Doyle trilogy growing up. I read those back to front, and they got optioned for a movie deal. And they were going to be, why do I know this? And they were going to be directed by Charles Sturridge, who is Tom Sturridge's father. He's the actor who, if you've seen the new, oh God, what's it called? That Netflix show about the dream god or whatever.
Sandman?
Yes. So the guy that plays Sandman, his father is a director.
Okay.
And they were going to make a movie out of the Gemma Doyle trilogy, and they told Libba that she had to, I think it was something like, because remember there's like her and her three girlfriends.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think they wanted to change one to a guy or get rid of one or something and like bring in a love triangle and all these kind of stuff. Yeah, and like remember, like she falls for Kartik.
Yeah.
Very
early on, and that's always
very early on, and he's like
interest.
He's her boy.
Yeah.
And like, I loved them together. But I remember Libba talking about how she turned it down because she didn't want to remove that kind of essential, like, female friendship factor.
Well, especially since like not to ruin that, but like the three people are incredibly important for who they are in the story. So like
Yeah.
Laura, one of them is like a very like plain Jane person who's poor and she's very important to show like the social class. And then two of them, huge spoilers, so jump 15 seconds if you don't want to hear about this YA novel. Two of them are in love with each other. So like you can't
Yes.
take any of them out without ruining it. So
Yeah, and I think it was one of those cases of like, there's too much estrogen going on here.
yeah,
And she was like, no, no, we're not doing this. So it never got made into a movie, which
good
breaks my
for
heart.
her. I know.
Um,
I still want it, but like good for her
yeah. And
for
then she
being
has like
like,
the Diviners, the one set in the
yes.
20s. So like everything she does, I just think is like the bee's knees. Um, who else? I love Kurt Vonnegut. Funnily enough, though, my favorite Vonnegut is like not one of the books. It's a short story. It's called Harrison Bergeron. I don't know if you've ever read it.
Yeah.
I don't know if I've read it, but I've heard of it.
You could
I've only
probably,
read Slaughterhouse-Five, so I don't know of any
yeah,
other works.
and there's a short movie made out of it, but I don't want to
Yeah.
recommend it because the actor is involved in scandal.
Oh.
It's the Army Hammer.
Oh.
Oh.
One of the weirder scandals.
Yeah.
One of the
So
one of
It's a
the more
very strange
confusing.
one.
Yeah.
yeah.
Are you saying that you condone his actions?
It's like I haven't been able to watch it since that whole thing happened, and I'm like,
Yeah.
ooh, ew. There's so many movies, and I even like it's like I don't want to watch like the Rebecca movie or Call Me by Your
hmm
Name or any of the other
Same.
ones that he was in because I'm like, why did you have to just ugh?
Yeah.
But the short story itself was one of the first kind of dystopian ones that I had read. And it was just fascinating the way. So it was like they're in a like pure, and I'm using heavy quotation marks, purely like equal society. So like, if you're like a ballerina, like you wear weights. So it was like basically trying to make everyone the same. And if you're super smart, you wear like a helmet that like zaps your brain every time you have an intelligent thought. So it was like they're basically trying to keep everyone at this sort of like middling level.
Mm-hmm.
And the main character, so I think if I remember, it's told, I think, from like the dad's point of view, and he's like,
Okay.
kind of wearing a helmet and kind of getting these thoughts. And his wife is so airy fairy that she doesn't wear a helmet. I don't think she doesn't need to.
Sure.
And it's kind of, she sees the bad things going on in society and she's like, oh, why is that bad? And they're like, their son goes missing. And then he sees him on the TV. And the son basically is like, because he's so strong and he's so smart, he's like wearing all these weights and he's got a big heavy helmet. And he sort of manages to like tear it off. And there's like a whole big ballet scene. So it's quite like operatic for a short story. And I just remember reading this and I was like, damn. So that between that and like, a lot of the other dystopian ones at the time, like the Hunger Games, obviously. There's a great Australian series that I think is really, really underrated. And the movie's good. This one I can recommend. And it's called Tomorrow When the War Began.
Okay.
And it's a group of Australian teenagers who they like go off into the outback, into the bush, and they're like camping and having a great time. And when they come back, everyone has like been taken out of their homes and
Oh,
rounded up
wow.
and put in camps, and
Oh,
they're like
wow.
trying to like free their parents and find out what
Oh,
happened.
wow.
Yeah, and what I liked about it is he never names the invaders.
Oh,
There's
that's
it's
nice.
so it's set in the modern world, it's set in the present, but it's not, it's not like demonizing anybody. It's basically just
Mm-hmm.
like, because things like Red Dawn bug me, but with this one, it's just like the invaders, and you never get like a specific who or why. It's kind of, make it up in your head kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And it just kind of focuses on the teenagers. And it was the guy who wrote it, and he passed away recently, John Marsden. But he was I believe, I'm pretty like 90% sure he was a high school principal in Australia. And he got really frustrated because everyone would always depict teenagers as stupid. And he was like, teenagers are actually smart. and they actually, they're very, very capable if you give them half a chance. So he wrote the books to kind of show that, like, even in these sort of dystopian kind of oppressive worlds, teenagers can be quite capable of stuff. So I read like all 7 of them. Definitely recommend those ones, and the movie's good too. And what else? I liked JD Salinger. I know it's kind of cliche to say. I didn't love Catcher in the Rye. I liked Franny and Zoe, actually. I think that was the one I preferred.
I like Franny and Zoe too.
Franny and Zoe is very good.
Every time I'm like, I like Salinger, people are like, of course you like Salinger. I'm like, okay, but there's a reason people like him.
There was a recent book I read that was like very Franny and Zoe in the modern era with Maori people. It was very good. So, it's called Vlad and oh my gosh, I forget the name. It was very trippy. But yeah, highly recommend that. I'll have to look up the name later.
I think, and like it's kind of funny being a Tolkien girl and saying I love dialogue, because Tolkien is like the master of telling and not showing. All like the Silmarillion, absolutely hands down, probably my favorite book at the moment. I swear there's like 4 lines of dialogue in that entire book. But
takes 10 years to describe a leaf.
Right. And God love him. Like some of his lines it took me quite a few tries, and I like fully, like, I love him. He's my favorite author, but it took me a while to properly get into it and be able to like, move with it. But that being said, I love books that are dialogue heavy, like Salinger's. And like, even like, stuff like Gilmore Girls, even if sometimes I like want to take Lorelai and Rory's heads and smash them together and be like, do you have any idea how privileged you are, you weirdos? But even saying that, like, I love just the snappy dialogue, and I feel like sometimes that's something I find is missing in a lot of books. And I also find sometimes books portray relationships, and I don't just mean like romantic relationships, but like interpersonal friendships and everything, a bit, I don't know if it's idealistically, but like they're almost too manufactured. Like, and I've started tracking it, like not like on paper or anything,
just that
like
you notice mentally, it more.
Yeah. It's like if you start reading books and just be like, okay, do they use nicknames for each other? And it drives me crazy now that I actually look for it, how few books will have people using nicknames or terms of endearment. And I'm like, okay, that's normal in real life. You call people, babe or bro or whatever, mate, any of these kind of things, like depending on where you are and what your slang is.
Excuse me, Thaddeus the Third.
I always do like full names. And I'm like, okay, I don't know how you address your siblings and your partner, but I don't think it's like that. And there's like a severe, or it's like, someone's, it's always Katniss, right? And this is not hating on Hunger Games. I love the Hunger Games, but like, just as an example, like theoretically, if she and Peeta were like dating, like he would call her Cat or something, it's like, or babe, or any of these kinds of things. And you don't even see that even in like Twilight. Someone in the Twilight Reddit posted this the other day, and they go, the only time in Twilight where Edward uses a term of endearment for Bella is when Robert Pattinson breaks character in Breaking Dawn, and when Bella's dying and she's becoming a vampire, and he says like, baby, come back to me, or something like this. And it's like one of the most heart-wrenching scenes in the film. And again, I'm not debating how, campy and silly Twilight can be. I am, well aware of that. I grew up with those books. I love them and all their campy, cheesy goodness. But you do get to a point where you're like, why do none of these characters actually seem to really get along well enough to have nicknames for each other?
You know who got that memo about nicknames? Tracy Deonn. Tracy Deonn loves a nickname, and all of her characters, every single one, I think, has a shortened version of their name.
YA
author. I don't know her.
She's a YA author. I do feel like YA authors are more interested in having nicknames because it's teenagers and you want that lingo, snappy dialogue. So Tracy Deonn wrote Legend Born, excellent book. We covered it on the podcast. Go read them. Especially if you kind of like campy, but like a huge.
I love the cover.
This is the second book,
it's like
Blood Marked.
It's Arthurian legends in modern day times. Excellent book. But the biggest joke we did when we were covering it was like she will shorten a name no matter what. So there's like Sarah, and they're like, we call her Sayer, and we're like, well,
it's like that's 2 syllables.
You didn't necessarily need that. Like you could have done one.
Oh, there was. Okay, I will add an addendum to my comment about nicknames and say there are limits. And one of them, oh God, what is it called? I don't know the name of the book, but it's a new one about Greek gods. And I want to say it's about like Medusa or something like this, but they give the character the silliest nickname ever. And I can't remember. I was like, I just saw it on the back cover because someone else posted it and they're like, really? And I just saw it and I was like, oh dear. Like
it's good until it's not.
Yeah. I do think though, I agree with like what you're saying, like overall though, maybe just not like nicknames, but like the language itself not being too formal, because I've noticed that as a reader too, and like I've even like made comments to Hannah about certain books. I'm like, people don't speak like this. Like if I'm reading a book and the characters are supposed to be like people my age from the Midwest, because there are a lot of mystery books with characters my age from the Midwest, if they're speaking in extremely formal language, I'm like, I don't believe this is true. This is
This is a big pet peeve of Laura, because she read the book I've been working on for quite a while, and she was like, your students don't sound like students.
Yeah, they're too over-edited.
Yeah.
That's how it feels too, where I'm like, we need to get the legal team out of here. They've been spending too much time writing this dialogue for these kids.
Yeah, it's like, and that's another thing. If you think of how much people say like or like when they talk, or or any of these kind of phrases, obviously you don't want to overload a text because then it gets a little annoying to read. But I think sprinkling it in lightly kind of makes it seem more authentic, or having people kind of rephrase things mid-sentence and that sort of way is I do feel like sometimes dialogue people go like, this is how I want it to sound, and I'm like, okay, but that's not how it sounds in real life.
Exactly.
Yeah, I'm really big on that.
Yeah.
Well, bring it back to your book with great dialogue.
Oh, well, thank you.
This book is a second chance romance, like I said, of 2 people like coming back later in life, but they're also dealing and coming to terms with like the decisions they made when they were young. So what kind of drew you to this type of like drama and this like back and forth of like revisiting history and seeing things through new light?
Originally, it didn't have the flashbacks. So that was a later editing decision where I had some scenes that I just kind of wrote for me to be like, wait, how did this actually happen? That were just kind of my own reference points. And I do that a lot. I think I have fan fiction of my own books. You end up being like, here's a side scene that no one else is ever going to see. But I realized about halfway through that it was super depressing. It was super depressing. There was no joy. There was no kisses. There was no like it was supposed to be a romance novel. And I was like, okay, I kind of need to give them like flashbacks to happier times where, you can kind of see why they fell in love and like have this great, because it's hard to sell an I'm saying this as a 32-year-old, it's hard to sell an epic love that'll last 12 years between teenagers.
Yeah.
And that's like, you get to the end of a lot of books for teenagers and you're like, you're breaking up in 3 years, honey.
You're not gonna make it.
Yeah. So I was like, okay, like it had to be believable. Obviously, like you have the sort of werewolf angle of super commitment, which kind of adds a magical level of like, okay. But, I wanted to kind of show like they have different socioeconomic status. They have different families. Like one had great parents who, aren't there. One has really controlling parents. One's rich, one's poor. And I was like, you have to kind of have that foundation of like, okay, what could possibly make a guy not give up on someone who ghosts him you know, and that's when I started writing the backstory, and I was like, it had to be. So it's like, obviously there's an element to which, you know, someone who is an orphan and doesn't have a lot of close friends, and, you know, that might impact how much they, you know, tie their worth to someone else, and really, you know, have that focus. And I do think, like, even now, like, there are times where, being 32, I'll like think of people I knew in high school and still have a kind of visceral reaction to it. So it very much can be something you carry, but I wanted to kind of give a sort of believable foundation as to, you know, okay, we know why the werewolf is, like, you know, still obsessed because magic, but like it had to be believable from the human side. And actually that was another thing, like I said, about the running into, you know, when legally could they have got married and where. But another angle was, I was writing the book and filling out my tax return. And I was like, wait, if they're married, that's going to be a problem. So I have a line in the book about filing taxes because I wanted someone to be like, wait, hang on. How
They're
could this
taken care
legally have
of.
worked?
On paper, they are in fact married.
Yeah. I was like,
Emotionally, yes, as well.
yeah. So he's like, that's why he has that conversation with his brother where he's like, you know, I thought that if I, like, you know, kept in touch, it would kind of force him to talk to me. Um, so I did try and
I
cover.
do like that there's that like self-doubt though that exists with Damien. And
yeah,
I was kind of curious, like, too, do you think, like, I know that you're not sure if this is going to be a series or if you'll return to the world, but do you think that, like, if you did that knowing what we know at the end, like, is there still going to be as much self-doubt, or is that layer still going to be there for him?
I would say to a degree, yeah. And I would also say, like, you know, like, because, you know, I grew up, you know, not rich. And, you know, it is something that really forms kind of, you know, even if you do eventually become, you know, more steady or more solvent, you always kind of remember what it's like not to have anything. And you remember what it's like being treated like you have less, or you are less because you have less. So I think that kind of, like, when you're poor as a kid, that shapes your character, you know. And
which will be interesting for that character moving
yeah,
forward, knowing what we know about certain beings. Like, that is interesting to me.
yeah. And I do think as well, like, I like to end stories on positive notes, but I don't like to ever be like, and not to talk about like the most controversial book in history, but one of the reasons that I got really mad as a child about the ending of Harry Potter, before all of everything happened with that. But before we knew all of that and all the politics and all the awfulness, when I was a kid and I got to the ending of Harry Potter, I got super upset and I hated it. And it's a reason no one will, like, everyone's like, really? This is what upset you? And the last line was like, all was well. And that drove me crazy because, and I it's such a weird thing to be like hung up on as a kid. But one of the things I loved about Lord of the Rings was, you get to the end of Lord of the Rings and Galadriel tells Treebeard, no, it's not the end. You know, we'll see each other again. More's gonna happen. And Tolkien, so like in the Silmarillion, Christopher Tolkien actually removed it, which pisses me off. But in Tolkien's original notes, he mentions a prophecy where basically all of the elves are going to come back, and Morgoth is going to come back, and there's going to be a big final, you know, battle type of, like, you know, it's kind of like Norse mythology-esque. And I love that because I was like, I get to the end and I'm like, oh, the adventure's not totally done, right? There's more. And so I like ending things on like a kind of positive note, but there could be more. So that was something that always drove me nuts about Harry Potter, as a child, was just, I was like, oh, that's it? So there's just no more.
Well, and then She Who Must Not Be Named made a play, and all was not in fact well. So.
Yes. But like 10 years before that, I was just like, are you shitting me?
Yeah.
They were magicking the shit away.
Yeah,
so.
I love
yes! That why do we know that? Never mind.
We're not gonna go down that poop hole.
No. All we're gonna say is Suzanne Collins does it the right way, where she keeps shit locked down, and then she's like, "Let me create a new novel where I turn everything on its head."
We know very little about Suzanne Collins, and we like it that way.
I love her for appearing every 5 years with a new book and then vanishing. I know nothing about her as a person. She has no social media. I'm like, you have this. It's kind of like like I know people have issues with the Outlander books and a lot of their criticisms are very legitimate. I'm not saying that, but I do appreciate that Diana Gabaldon just sort of pops up with a book and then vanishes. You know, it's like if I ever become like super successful, that's what I want to do. I'll be like a hermit for 5 years and then throw a book out in the wild and then vanish again. You know, I think once you hit a certain level, just get off the internet.
Just stop. You stop. There's certain levels of echelons where it's like, I don't think you remember how to be a person anymore, and that's not your fault. But also, like, have the wherewithal to recognize that.
Yeah. Even some authors I adore, I'm just like, just log off, man.
Yeah, same. Can you talk to us a little about like the world building in Strange Grey Everything, especially like I was really interested in the school, and it gave me very much like kind of vibes of like Wednesday a little bit when the school was mentioned. And so that was like very much what I was picturing. But can you like go a little bit deeper into that, and like if you always kind of thought that Damien was going to enter into this world?
Initially, no. And also that twist at the end that I won't spoil, but that involves the sister-in-law. That was a final change too, because I realized I like happy endings. And I was like, I don't know if I want to be that mean. But yeah, initially it hadn't ended like that. And I think the original ending that I had written was he stays. Can I do like a spoiler alert?
You can do this.
You know what? We'll do spoilers. We've given you a great overview of this book. We're getting into spoiler territory. We're spoiling it all. It's fine. So
if you ever warning from out. Here.
Yeah.
So if you don't want to be spoiled, stop now. Okay. So I was initially having him end the book human. And I think the original ending was just sort of like the original ending also didn't involve kind of the dad, Carlisle's dad either.
Yep.
And I had it sort of like, what was it? He like moves into the mansion and then they sort of make it work and the brother was like super unhappy. And I was like, I didn't love so it was like I kind of sat on the book for like 6 months and it was like done, but I couldn't hit publish because I was like, I don't love the ending. And I went back through it, and because one of the things that frustrates me with supernatural romances is what happens when you get to the end of them.
Yeah.
And it's like, you know, from everything from like if like Buffy, right? Buffy will never be a vampire because she's a vampire slayer. So the only way for that not to be absolutely tragic to me is like if Spike becomes human. Also, weird segue, but I just saw an interview where James Marsters was saying he was initially supposed to appear on Firefly as Spike, as a vampire, sitting in a bar talking about how things never change. And I was like, I'm sorry, what? Anyway, segue over. But, and like, so I don't know if you've read A Discovery of Witches.
Yes, with Laura has, yeah.
What? Okay, so Deborah has made it very, very, very clear she will never turn Diana into a vampire. And I'm like, well, that's a bit depressing, isn't it? So Matthew lost one wife, and now he's got his second wife, and she's gonna die too. And I know there's like a whole point on like mortality there, but okay, like come on, we're dealing with supernatural creatures.
So what I'm getting here is like it's more of like the continual loss of love is something that kind of sticks with you, that you're like, I'm
like it needs to be, I think
okay
you either, yeah, like you need to have them both become human or both become supernatural. So it's like, you know, when Lord of the Rings, right, Arwen becomes mortal. So she doesn't like live without Aragorn, you know, she dies when he dies. And I'm like, okay, you know, like obviously that's really sad and tragic, but she's not going to go on for eternity depressed, right? Because that would just be, I would hate that. And, you know, I have another book where one character is immortal, and he gives it up and becomes mortal for the girl. And then I have books where, like, you know, obviously, so in this one, he becomes a vampire. And there were a couple, so it was like, that was one of the reasons, was like, I don't like, you know, if you're going to end up together, you have to end up together on the same timeline trajectory. Either you're both supernatural or you're both human, pick a lane. And that annoyed me in True Blood too. So there's a few of them where I'm like, why would you not just line everybody up? It's just like a personal thing with me that really bugs me. And then the other one was knowing Carlisle as a character, and the way, like the entire way through the book, he's like horrified and scared and anxious. And while it's like obviously really justified giving everything he's been through, that's not the basis for a healthy relationship.
Right.
Yeah.
Having that, you know, removed from the scenario where Damien's no longer breakable, you know, it kind of gives them even playing field. And, you know, then they can sort of relax a little bit, and their relationship isn't about, you know, oh, if I touch you with my pinky finger, I'll break you in half. It's more just, okay, now we can actually sort out our problems on an equal level. So there were a few angles to it, but I didn't want them to end the story where Carlisle is just going to spend the next, you know, however many years like afraid to touch his own husband. That just seems super mean and depressing. So I reworked that bit too. And I had fun with the vampire chick. She was good fun to write. I like evil vampire chicks. They're fun.
She's kind of like evil neutral though.
Yeah.
Like
chaotic neutral or whatever.
Chaotic neutral. Well, it is interesting because, like you said, Carlisle has this very like deep duty and this deep like I don't want to hurt you, but like both Damien and Carlisle are people who have a very specific duty towards their family and loved ones, like that often breeds tension in their own relationships. So I'm wondering, are like family dynamics something you often find yourself writing about, or is that specific to like and the truth of these two characters?
I think it's not something I ever had really growing up. Like I don't have close siblings personally. I wish. I always badly wanted an older brother. But it will probably be of no surprise that my favorite TV show growing up was Supernatural. And I have always really, really liked writing about and reading about super strong sibling bonds, because I think it's another kind of intense, protective, you know, relationship that you can't quite quit because you're tied to them, but you know, it's coming from a good place of, you know, wanting to take care of people. So in my other series, my sci-fi series, like the two brothers, their like connection is sort of the whole linchpin, the whole foundation of the entire book series. And so I have that in quite a few. Something just fell in my bathroom. I have no idea what that was.
Do you need to check on it?
I'm sure something just like fell off the wall, whatever. Okay. But it is, I really like having close sibling bonds. But then funnily enough, I'm actually working on a series where like the main ultra evil antagonist is like the good guy's twin, and like he can't stand anything she does, and it sort of complicates everything. But I do think just it's a fun dynamic for me. So I really liked kind of having that compare contrast where I think one of the funnest things to write is where you agree with every argument, even though they're not in agreement.
Yeah.
So you're like, okay, but the brother's making a good point, but like the other brother's making a good point, but like I still want you guys to get together despite these good points.
Right.
It kind of I like a case of the dilemma of being on everybody's team and then trying to figure out how to work backwards when none of those teams actually want to get along.
I love that.
Totally get that. So a lot of, like you mentioned this earlier, but like you're drawn to small town stories, you were saying, and a lot of this is about how Damon and his brother decide to stay in St. Mike's Cove instead of moving on to like other work or locations like most of the people do in their area. And that kind of hit home for me because I'm in like that exact same situation where most of the, like I live in a very rural area and our town is literally a village. It's not even a town. And so most of the people go away. They move, they go to college, they move away because they need to get jobs or they meet people and start families in other places. And it's understandable. People around here understand. But I thought it was important representation, honestly. And I was kind of wondering if that was something you were like intentionally trying to represent and like why you're drawn to small town stories.
I grew up in a city and then moved to a city and enjoyed neither.
Okay. Not what I was expecting.
Yeah, I think I have a lot. I feel like a lot of my preferences are almost like contradictory or something. Like I love the people that I meet in cities, and I like the access to things that's very handy. So I always say like my ideal would be living like a half-hour train ride from a city in the countryside. Because I like visiting cities. Like one of my favorite places in the world is Amsterdam. I've been there like 6 or 7 times, I think. Um, but I prefer small towns as a place. Um, and like when I was in Canada, I was in a small town and there were 40 houses, 20, maybe less. We were a good 45-minute drive from the nearest grocery store. And our neighbors were so lovely. And it was funny because I knew more from a brief like of my neighbors from a brief few months in Canada than I did living in a city in Ireland for 12 years. We never spoke to our neighbors in the city. You would get new neighbors and you would only know that because you'd see new posts with new names and you're like, oh, do we have new neighbors now? And you'd never interact with them. And like, I'm not an inherently extroverted, super social person, but I I like the idea of, people who recognize you. You go into the coffee shop, they know who you are, and you go into your town shop and they know. So it's like, I made friends with the girl at the grocery store in Canada. And every time I went in, she would, ask me questions and, I learned about her plans and, she wanted to move to Quebec and all these kind of things. And I feel like people are less on guard in a small town. I feel like they're more, and even if maybe you have different like political leanings or these kinds of things, I do think there's more of a sense of like, okay, maybe you think this way, I think that way, but I'll still support you because you're in my community and we take care of the people in our community. And so I think there's, it's more of a, well, we're all far away from something. So it's not weird if you want to come ask me to borrow some eggs and bread, if like, and we we were in Canada a few years ago as well. And like the well pump stopped working, and my husband had to pull 300 feet of rope out of this well, and the neighbors came over and got their tractor and started helping him, and there is that, like,
I had a neighbor literally help my husband dig out our septic, and we sent him like a thank you card, and I was like, there's no way to thank someone enough for digging my poop out of something. Like, I don't know how to help.
There's so many small acts of kindness that you get in a small town. And I think, it's like, I do think there's quite a few unfortunate stereotypes about small town life, and I've not found them to be true. In my own experience, your neighbors are quite willing to help you out, or, give you a lift into town, or, there was one day we couldn't get into town, and what was it? I was like waiting for a bank transfer, and I was like, and we were supposed to carpool in, and I was like, I sent her a text, and I was like, oh, we can't actually carpool in today. I'm waiting for the Irish bank to send me money, so there's no point in going because I won't be able to go to the grocery store. And she was like, yeah, no problem. We'll go another day. And she shows up at our house like 3 hours later, just with like a gift bag. And she was like, I didn't know if you'd be out of anything, but I bought you some bread and some milk and some, they had like these like Nova Scotian cookies and stuff like. So she was just like went out of her way to be kind and unasked, unprompted, and it was just quite sweet. And I think I really like that about small towns. There's more. It's kind of weird, but there's more of a sense of a community with fewer people stretched further out than there is with more people in close quarters in a city. And I feel like that's contradictory somehow, but like I didn't know anybody living in the city, and I wouldn't have felt comfortable asking for help from anybody, and I don't think anyone would have offered it. And that's not to say that like they were unkind or unfeeling. I feel like people in cities don't feel like they can offer because they'll come across as, intrusive or creepy, or, it's like you got to mind your own business.
Small towns, they don't care about that. I can't tell you how many times people have driven by my house, like driven like 5 miles to be like, oh, we drove by your house the other day. You got a lot of goats out there. How many goats do you have? And it's like, okay, you just went very much out of your way to spy on me.
There are so many times where my dad will be like, let's just drive past this house. And I'm like, why?
Yeah. Or people will kind of pull into the driveway and be like, you're new.
Yeah.
Oh, exactly. Yeah. No shame about that out here.
Yeah. And I don't know. It's like, I can see why maybe that's not everyone's cup of tea, but I quite liked it. I felt safer with less people further apart than I did in the city. So I just prefer, I know, like for me, like my ideal location in the future, wherever I end up, will be, a small town. And I'd like to know my neighbors, and I'd like to, kind of have that sense of community that you don't get in my experience. I'm sure this isn't everyone's experience, but in my experience, you don't get that in a city. So
I think community is different for everyone. And I really like that you're able to pick up on some of those like really special glimmers of like rural and small town life, because I do think there are a lot of stereotypes that exist, like you were saying. And I do think some of them are true, because like I have my own qualms with small town living, but I do really appreciate how you really have like kind of put a spotlight on that, even just in this discussion, and made it seem like actually kind of a magical place to live in small towns and rural life. So I appreciate that.
You don't always get like, pizza delivered when you want to, that kind of thing. But,
I mean, we don't have like fashion trends take years to make it out here. Like we're not.
Honestly, you're better off. Modern fashion is not my taste.
Yeah.
And also chain restaurants. You're talking about pizza. Yeah, we're not getting pizza delivered. No way. You got to go to your local Casey's.
Oh yeah, no. This Canadian town that we were. So it was like we were on one side of the mountain, and then the village was like you had to go up the mountain and then back down the other side of the mountain to get there. No Starbucks, nothing. It was just this local tiny place, and oh god, they'd make muffins, and they were like this big, and they were so good. And they were all so nice, and they'd be the kind of people who was like, and it was snowing. There was so much snow, and they, everyone would plow each other's roads and come out and help, those who were older chip away at the ice. We woke up one morning and there was a layer of snow outside, and the neighbor was just had his like John Deere tractor and was digging our driveway so that we could get out.
That's
There's a lady in our local town that her husband passed away, and I got really emotional. This was like earlier this year. I get really emotional because her neighbors that live on either side of her, they have been taking turns mowing her lawn because her husband used to do it for her. And one of the guys that does it, like, and they're all old people. They're like 80s.
Oh, yeah.
And the two guys that do it, one of them, he has had multiple strokes and everything, and he's still like kind of recovering from his strokes and everything, does a lot of therapy. But I'm like, he's still going out of his way to make sure that her lawn is mowed, taking care of his neighbor. And I'm like, that just makes me so emotional, like this sense of like community that people have for each other. So,
well, when my mom died, there's like one bar down the road from our house because we live in the middle of nowhere. We lived in Laura's area, and my dad like hadn't eaten anything. He was like full morning, and the bar down the street just brought us food over because they found out, and they like liked my mom, and they were like, "Oh, here's all this food." And it was like the first time my dad was excited to eat something. So there is like
that's so
that
nice
special connection. So
yeah, and this is so random. I noticed it from the town bus drivers. So like my husband and I would, when we were in that town in Canada, and it was the dead of winter, and so we'd go from one tiny Canadian town to the other, and they had finally gotten their bus service, and we were ecstatic. We're like, oh my God, we don't have to walk half an hour from one town to the next. And the bus drivers, like, they knew everybody. So when we showed up, they're like, who are you? And we're like, we're over from Ireland. And they're like, oh, okay, why? But they would, like, there were so many locals that were like elderly or had, disabilities, and they couldn't drive. And these bus drivers would go off route to drop them at their house. And I was so happy just like waiting an extra 10 minutes on the bus, because I was like, this is the nicest thing I've seen. And he would tell people, he'd be like, no, stay on the bus and I will drive you. And they even did that for us. They're like, okay, where do you need to be let off? And like, we'd be like, oh, we're going to this shop here. We're going to this diner here. And they wouldn't even like go to the bus stop. They'd be like, okay, here's the closest. And they would just pull over and like let us off. And then there were days where it was like massive snowstorms, and we didn't have Canadian phones, so we were kind of going from Wi-Fi hotspot to Wi-Fi hotspot. And they'd be like, okay, well, there's construction here, so I'll probably be back at this time. And they'd be like just trying really hard to like take care of all the people on their bus route. And it was so nice. Like, I love
super
Ireland,
heartwarming.
It's always do that there.
It's very nice because, like, in big cities, I feel like there's so much more like red tape and things like that. Like, I remember my cousin lived with us, and they like went into we went to private school, and they went into the school, and they're like, so we're taking him. So like, could we maybe see how he's doing in school? And the principal just let them. And I'm like, that's so illegal in a public school, and you would never get away with that. So, but yeah, I you talk a lot about small town communities, and I feel like that's a huge like theme in this with him, staying with his roots. But another thing you have is like a very unique magic system, and you have like a good way of layering like the upper crust of society within like having riches and what that could make you do, but also within like species related. Like, you talk a lot in this book about how werewolves are seen as others in the community. They're seen as more dangerous. And Carlisle mentions that many people are even unhoused who are werewolves. So, was this something you like wanted to create to add extra layers in, or is this something you were inspired by from like other werewolf media? Like, what made you kind of shine a light on this type of, discussion?
Kind of a bit of both, maybe.
Yeah.
So it's the kind of the funny thing that I always run into with my magic stories is like, so I'm Jewish, right? And I don't like, and this isn't to like offend anyone or make a point or anything, just my own personal thing is I don't like the idea of hell. It seems really sad and horrible, and I've obviously grown up with so much media that kind of depicts that and everything. And so it's like I was very pointed with doing like the underworld rather than hell. Um, and then like, I do think there's kind of, if you look at like, vampire lore, and something I find quite funny with vampire lore is like the early vampire tales were Irish. Insofar as like the classic Dracula vampire that we see, not like obviously there's like Slavic lore and Romanian lore that goes backwards in other ways. But if you think of Dracula by Bram Stoker and Carmilla, I think is the other one, the like first lesbian vampire story from like the 1700s or whatever, both done by Irish authors. And I always, when you read kind of the vampire stories, they always seem sort of snooty and a bit up themselves. And I do think, I was having that parallel between the characters of like, rich and poor. And obviously living in Ireland, you would find parallels between rich and poor or Irish and English or these kinds of things as well. And so I think I had that parallel then brought into like the magical community with like, sort of one group feeling like, they had like a higher stance than another group, and that kind of, sense of, I'm trying to think of a way to phrase that. That kind of, especially if you're looking at like the rich characters, that kind of sense of superiority. So you'd kind of, and then you have this sort of, demon character who sort of goes between the two, and he can sort of see both sides of it and be kind of like, okay, well, there's problems from both ends here. And I think that was important to kind of juxtapose the two of them, and you kind of, like, I imagine if there was, a magical world, one can hope, in reality, that, in the same way we have our issues as humans, I do think, there would be issues of that kind where, one group would probably think themselves better or more knowledgeable or more well-read or, superior to another group, depending on what they have and what they've gained and that sort of thing. So,
yeah.
So love is obviously a major component of the book. And I thought it was interesting that you mentioned at one point that Henry comes to his relationships differently than Carlisle does. And I was kind of interested in like why you wanted to portray these loving relationships in different ways in this fantasy story.
There was actually a line that I don't think I explored as much as I wanted to. And I think it's like if I had a spin-off, I would go back to it. And it's where when Damien's still human and he sort of gets weird vibes. And he's like, I don't know why I get weird vibes from Henry. And that was sort of the subtle way of being like, he's a werewolf and he's giving off weird freaking werewolf vibes. And that kind of territorial behavior. But I think there's also that sense of like, some people are super idealistic in romance and are like, love can conquer all. And some people, are just like, they approach relationships more pragmatically. And so with Henry's character, he's, coming at it from that perspective of, he had this violent encounter when he was a teenager, and it was with another student, and
really tragic, actually. Like,
yeah,
when we get that info, it's like, oh my gosh, that is awful.
Fully tragic. And so, and that followed by attacking his own brother. So for him, he kind of, has a lot more self-hatred. And
just adding in really quickly, like I really liked that was the way that he turned Carlisle, because it just kind of made more sense that it would be a situation like that rather than them individually being attacked by separate students or separate werewolves. It was like, it makes more sense that he would have been around his brother. But okay, sorry.
Yeah.
Just had
flat tires ruin everything.
Excellent plotting. Traffic and car accidents were a huge component of this novel. So.
Yeah, and I was that was the thing. It was like, it seemed to me like, if you're sort of living this kind of, line of, okay, as long as nothing goes wrong, it'll be fine. And then, and again, I think that, comes from, I remember a few years ago, a politician had said that they were like, oh, what's one missed paycheck? And it was to do with government workers and not allocating funds for government workers or something. And the guy was a multimillionaire, and he was like, oh, what's one missed paycheck? Just dip into your savings. And the response to this was, what savings? Right? Like, so many people, and there were, articles and stuff coming out about how many people are, one emergency away from utter ruin. And so kind of compounding that to like, okay, maybe not like, a, emergency that we would have in real life, but like, what do you do if you're one wrong move away from, everything going wrong? So it was like, kind of, yeah, they're rich. Yeah, they have all these privileges. They have, all of these, plan A, plan B, plan C. They've got, cages and cameras and everything. But like, what do you do when there's traffic? You can't defeat traffic. What do you do when there's a flat tire? What do you do when your parents are out of town and you're the only person who can go pick up your brother? So it was it was like a scenario that even money couldn't buy you out of. And I've seen that before with, like, there was another super, super wealthy politician talking about, and like, millionaire politician talking about how he went to, I think he was an American politician from, I want to say Kentucky or something, maybe. But he was talking about how he went to do surgery in Canada because the surgery he wanted in America was like, like $35,000-$40,000 or something. I'm making these numbers up. It was a lot. And he went to Canada and it was a few $100. And I've had this conversation with international friends where one of my friends, she's Finnish, and she gave birth, and there was like mass, she was like, like everything went wrong basically. And she had to go from one hospital to the other. I think she was in hospital for like 2 or 3 weeks, right? Like intense pregnancy. And she's fine. The baby's fine. But she finished all of this and her bill was €35. And then my friend in Chicago, who had a very smooth pregnancy, everything went right. And she was in and out in like a day or two. And her bill, I think when she was telling me about it, her kid was like 4 and she was still paying it off. And she had health insurance. So you kind of, it's interesting to kind of look at the different scenarios where, what can go wrong even when you're doing everything right and you're being cautious, so I think that was kind of an interesting angle to take.
Yeah, I really appreciated it. I thought it was a nice dose of realism within a fantasy.
Thank you.
Another dose of realism you have is like a very, you said the original part of this book was pretty depressing. I could definitely see that because a huge part of this book is the question of like, is love a sacrifice where it is better to let the other person go, or should the other person have the agency to choose the love that they want? And I feel like you didn't have like one side or the other that you fell down on, but what was it like kind of trying to develop that question through like Carlisle and Damien and having them like play off of each other because they both have very different views on it?
I was trying really hard not to make Carlisle's point unlikable, right? Like, I wanted people to be able to root for the guy who had ghosted his husband for 12 years, which is really hard to do.
It's really hard to root for anyone who ghosts someone.
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, how do I make this super rich, super privileged, massive ghoster someone you badly want to get his husband back? And, I think the fact that like the opening scene is him being like, I gave up everything to try and keep him safe. What are you doing? To his own brother. And still being upset about it kind of helped frame that. And then the whole way through, it's not like he wanted to leave or he was trying to be an asshole or any of these other things. It was him being like, okay, well, my brother destroyed my life and I murdered someone unintentionally, and I love you so much. I don't want that to happen to you, which hopefully comes across in a way that makes Carlisle pretty sympathetic, because like I do think, you know, when he's I think it's very clear like the whole way through he's not moved on, and he's, you know, loves his husband and he's trying really hard to be a good husband and by staying away. And like I think that's a hard line to kind of toe.
It's so interesting that you mentioned this though, because like we recently talked with Ravi Novice about They Came in the Night, and they were saying that in their book they tried really hard to make the characters like deal with the consequences of their actions. And it seems like that's the same situation we have going on with Carlisle here, where he is very much like, I killed someone and I have to deal with that. And I have to deal with all of the things that have happened to me and also try to protect people from myself, which is sometimes an insurmountable task.
Yeah. Well, and oh, sorry.
No, you go, because this is just such a good point. So you go.
No, and I think that's just something like, you know, like I think yeah, it just goes back to me wanting all the characters to have like reasons and believable and understandable reasons for why they do what they do, even if it puts them at odds, you know, with each other. And I think that's probably one of my favorite dynamics to explore in kind of any book or scenario, is where you're like, okay, I'm team everybody. Why can't they just get along? And then you're like, okay, but I know why they're not getting, you know, and you're kind of trying to chip away at it, because I like characters you can root for. And I like characters that you completely see their side, and you're sitting there going like, why can't you do this compromise and you know, just get over it? But then you're happy that they don't, because like, you know, it's like watching Lord of the Rings and, you know, the new TV show Rings of Power, and like, yeah, obviously in like, you know, a fan fiction world, it would be super fun to have Galadriel and Sauron, you know, have that moment. But like in the actual show, you don't want Galadriel to like contemplate being evil. You're like, stick to your guns, girl. So I do think there's a sense of like, you want people to not compromise themselves while staying like, you know, someone you can root for. And I think there's like, I love villains, but I like villains I can totally see the side of. Like,
it's really hard to understand the people that are just outwardly evil for absolutely no reason. It's like,
just evil for evil.
How did you grow? How was your childhood? Why did you come out of the womb evil? Like, I don't understand.
Like Magneto in X-Men, and I'm like, okay, I mean, I'm not saying I agree with his tactics, but like, you're talking to a Holocaust survivor. Of course, he's not going to take the restriction of his people well, you know? So
especially
like,
when he has the power to change it, which is his whole point. It's like, well, I have the power to change it, so why wouldn't I?
yeah, that kind of thing. So it's like, and or even Shadow and Bone.
Oh yeah.
And one of the things I actually find really frustrating about the main girl is the main girl like sees everything in black and white, whereas like the Alexander, the main villain guy, he's like, okay, well, when I was little, my entire family was murdered and wiped out, and you're telling me to get over it and accept a monarchy? No. So like, you know, I'm not saying he's going about it the right way at all. I'm not making that argument, but it frustrates me how everyone's like, you know, in the book itself and in the show, you know, it's like, oh, you should just roll over to the king who annihilated all your people. Like, you know?
No thanks.
I also think that
Yeah.
that's the power of like dealing with older people though, because like I was thinking about this, like the Carlisle character in a YA novel would be someone who had been like brooding and been like, I lost everything 200 years ago. And now this fresh face who I've had no past with, we can make it work because there's no drama or damage. Like
Yep.
you're actually dealing with the complications of someone who had to make that hard decision later in
Yeah.
life. Um, so I really do want more from this world because I also just want like a million stories of that school and what's going
Yeah.
on there.
Warrington is so cool.
It's so cool.
I and the little the kind of really tragic little vampire girl at the end,
Yeah.
she kind of broke my heart to write.
Yeah.
So I don't know, I might do more with her because
Please do.
I
Well,
got
and
to her ending bit and I was like, "Oh, you're kind of crazy and it's really sad."
well, that's what I was going to ask was were there any characters or like even species? Because you mentioned a lot of species, but we don't get to see a lot of them. Were there any of those that you wanted to spend more time with that you didn't get the chance to?
I think like looking at like Orion and the vampires would be fun.
Mm.
Um, but also I think like, you know, the vampire friend who ends up becoming like the guy running the school. And so obviously he's like forever young, but ends up, like maturing, like, you see this kind of authoritative figure who was also looking the same age as he was when they were younger. And I think he would be quite interesting to explore. Yeah, honestly, the school itself and all those moments where it's like, you know, you've got the ghosts and everything. And then you kind of like all those kind of flashback scenes where like they hear something shrieking, and that was just like a reference to every time like the doorway to the underworld is kind of opening and closing. I think that would be kind of fun to explore more. And then because I feel like, there are because both characters like Damien is just a big doubter at the start.
Mm-hmm.
And then Carlisle makes the point of just like, not my circus, not my monkeys. I'm not getting involved with any of your drama. So I do think there's a lot of stuff they've like ignored or explained away that could, be delved into more, which could be quite fun.
Yeah.
Well, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask about your writing and indie publishing, because you are not only a prolific writer, like you mentioned earlier, that you just kind of have like all these stories and you'll like start working on something else if it like pops into your head as you're going. But you're also just like a champion of indie authors and indie works online. And I was just kind of wondering if you could tell us about your journey in indie publishing and your journey with your writing overall.
I so I grew up writing fan fiction, back in the live journal fanfic.net heydays.
Hannah was there too.
Oh yeah, all right, very good. And stopped writing when I went to my undergrad for so Irish undergrads are 3 years, not 4. We skipped the whole first year of like required classes, and you just dive into the degree you want.
Smart.
Yeah, I was like, and
that's the way to do it.
No joke. One of my deciding factors to do Irish university was that I would not have to do like calculus or anything. I was like, there's no way I can do this in college. High school was bad enough. That's true story. So I just went straight in, and I in the first year you do 3 and then you drop 1 and then you get a dual degree. So I did English, history, and philosophy, and then I dropped English and I did history and philosophy. And didn't write for like 3 years, and I think it made me super crunchy. It's like just, you feel weird when you don't write and you don't read. So I met my husband towards the end of my second year, and then we left Ireland after I graduated, and we did Peru for a little bit, and then we went to Canada. And I spent the whole year just writing and writing and writing. And then we moved back to Ireland for my master's. And so by the time I went back to do my master's, I had already had like 6 books started. So and I had most of my series started, the Outlands and Haze, which is the kind of ghost story one. So that Haze is technically my first book, even though I published the Outlands first. I just kind of sat there for a little while on that one. And I tried querying it for about a year, and did the query trenches and that depressing nonsense of I sent it out to, I don't know, 25, 50 agents. I got one full request that never went anywhere of just like send me the full thing. And then turned to my husband one day and went, I don't have the patience for this. It's like I'm not going to spend 10 years. And because I remember, I think around that time, like there was a show called Hemlock Grove, and it was on Netflix. I never really watched it, but I remember reading that the guy that wrote it had queried his book for 10 years before it got picked up and then became a bestseller. So a lot of people I was seeing was like, it's a sign of success, and, fair play to him for not giving up. Honestly, that's like amazing, but I don't have the patience for that. It's like I write too much and have, I don't like schedules. I don't like, when I finish a book, I'm like, all right, it can go. I don't like waiting to share things, and I'm really bad with deadlines. It's one of the reasons I hate agreeing to like return reviews at a certain time, as I have the attention span of a spork, like I can't do anything on a time limit, which made my PhD really fun, I gotta say. Inevitably, I was either like a month early with a chapter or like 2 months late. So I don't know how my supervisors didn't murder me. But I got super impatient waiting to hear back from someone to publish my books. So I started looking into how I could do it myself and found, Create Space and that kind of thing. And then just started finding authors who had done it. And I found, so there's an author called Jamie McGuire, and she did like the Beautiful Disaster series. They're like, romances. But I remember finding her name, and it was like she was like the first self-published author to get her books in Walmart. And I was like, oh, so it is possible. And then I found a few more online. So I was finding more and more people who had like become success stories. And then I stumbled across Hugh Howey. Because I found his book in a tiny bookshop in Canada.
Is this Silo or?
Yeah, so it was Wool. Okay. It was the first one.
Okay.
And I found it completely at random, and I brought it home, and I was flipping through it, and I Googled it, and it was like, originally self-published, and I was like, what? And so I was like, oh my God, so I can find this in a tiny bookshop in Canada, and now it's like an Apple TV show, right? Mm-hmm. So I kept finding more and more examples. There was another one, Senlin Ascends was one.
Yeah, Josiah Bamkoff. Mm-hmm.
Yes, and he had been in SPFBO, and he didn't win, I don't think.
No,
I think he was just a runner-up. Mm-hmm. But I found his book in Waterstones in Cork. So more and more I was finding examples of people who had done it themselves and could still get success. And I was like, oh, fuck it. I'm just going to do it myself. So I did it with no clue and no advice, and not the first video. I didn't know any. I got my friend who was doing the masters. So we were in our masters together, and we did the PhD together, and she had the same supervisors as me. And I was like, will you be my editor? And she was like, all right, sure, why not? So I just kind of did it all really randomly without a clue, kind of put them out there. And then I was like, okay, now how do I find readers? So that was a fun few years of swimming in the dark and trying to figure out, how to find bloggers. I didn't know anything about the book writing community. I didn't even know there was one. I, was literally just completely lost. And I think I One, I tried VRO, which is voracious readers only. And what you do, and it's kind of cool how they do it, where you tell the guy that you have a book. It's like, I was like, I have this book. And he would basically send out like an email newsletter being like, if you're interested in this book, let me know. And then he would send me back someone's email. And so then I would email them the arc. And, it was like a kind of game of telephone, basically, of like finding bloggers. Um, and I ended up following a couple of them on my like super tiny private Twitter. And I saw kind of the community peripherally from, I was sort of a lurker at the start. And I was like, all right, fine, I'll try and be social. So during COVID, I made the book spotlight page randomly on a whim. I think I might have been in work on a lunch break. And because my job at the time during COVID was contact tracing. So I had to stand at the front of the art gallery and make sure everybody coming in had a mask on, and we like had their email and everything. So you end up just standing at the front of the building for 8 hours, and they were like, if no one's around, you can look at your phone. So it's like I had my clipboard here and I had my phone in front of me. And that was when I was just like, following people and retweeting people and randomly it's like everyone's like, how do you have so much time? I'm like, yeah, I was like, I'm just contact tracing. I've got nothing else to do. And then it took a while. I don't think the page actually had much traction for like the first year and a half. I think most people thought I was a bot.
Happens they were like, to the rest of
us. and I've had people be like, oh, I didn't follow her because I thought she was a bot. I'm like, I'm not a bot. I promise I'm not a bot. But eventually it kind of took off. And then I got a lot of people being like, oh, promote my book, promote my book. Sales are still a struggle. I have a heartbreaking number of encounters where people go, oh, I didn't realize you were an author. And I'm like, it's the first line of my bio description. But yeah,
reading is hard.
Yeah, a lot of the posts I make, I'm like, don't do this, and that's exactly what they do.
Yeah.
Or don't post AI, and they'll post AI, and I'm like, this is AI, and they go, oh, I thought you meant just writing, and I'm like,
no, everything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, but I think we speak on behalf of a lot of people, which I really appreciate all of the work that you do to like highlight a lot of spotlight, shall we say, indie authors and their work.
And not just indie authors. I think that's kind of how we found you, is you're such a highlight for so many people in the community overall. So we do appreciate you.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, you've shared a lot of our stuff too, and we really appreciate it.
There are some some really like sweet kind of podcasts that I've encountered that I sort of like, we met on Twitter, and then I'll find them on Bluesky and I'll be like, hey friend.
Well, it's been like such a treat to get you on this podcast. We've been wanting to for so long. So thank you.
I know I was even saying that to my husband. I'm like, I feel so awkward, and he'll be like, no, it's good to do it. And I'm like, so literally this is no joke, the first podcast I've ever done.
Oh, we feel
honored.
So honored. You heard it here first. This is amazing.
Trophy J.
And we did not badger her or bully her too much. So.
No.
Only a lot.
Well, thank you again. Could you tell our listeners something you're reading, watching, and or enjoying right now?
Okay, so reading, I finished a graphic novel yesterday that I found randomly on NetGalley because there was that whole NetGalley drama. So I ended up logging back into my NetGalley after like a year of not being on it, and saw it like popped up, and it's like a French graphic novel.
Ooh.
And it's so cute, and it's about a little witch named Broom, and like Brume, but she decides that because the village witch is gone, she's going to be the next village witch. And it's like it's super cute. It kind of reminds me of like the like Hilda Studio Ghibli type of little kids with like,
Have you read Garlic and the Vampire?
I think I've stumbled across it.
That's what
Yeah.
that kind of reminds me of what you're describing, and it's super cute.
Yeah, so she has like an encounter with like an old lady, and the old lady like vanishes, and she finds a pig, and she decides the pig is the old lady. And the poor pig is like narrating it and trying to like clean up the little girl's messes, and the girl keeps feeding him chocolate croissants, so he's like, fine, I'll stay and yeah, hang out with the little girl. So that was super cute. And it's still up on NetGalley, so you can probably request it. If they give me a copy, I'm sure they'd give anyone else a copy because my NetGalley ratio was not good.
Mine's really bad, so I probably can't
so
get it.
so bad. And well, because that was what started the whole drama, was that person who was like made the post about faking NetGalley reviews to like improve their ratio, and I was like,
Why would people
really?
do that? Just
It's
so
like, does it
silly.
matter?
Well, here's the
Jesus.
thing is, okay, yes, your ratio probably, I probably have run mine into the ground a little bit, but you can always go back and review a book even after it's like been dead and gone and
yeah.
improve your ratio. So sometimes I'll go back
Yeah.
and like review a book that I got like 2 years ago because I'm like, whatever, I finally read it. I'll give it a review. I'll say I posted it on socials. That's the whole point, is to get
Right.
people to read it. So
Yeah.
there's no
So it seems
reason to.
it seems super silly.
Yeah.
What I'm watching, what have I been watching lately? Weird amount of Scooby-Doo. I love Scooby-Doo.
Oh.
Interesting.
Um,
Okay.
um, what else? Rings of Power, obviously. From rewatching Santa
You're the
Clarita.
OG fan of Rings of Power.
I am like, I don't even like, that's my little baby show. It's like I will fight that hill alone if I have to.
I'm there with
Laura's
you.
fighting with you. Don't worry.
I appreciate.
You have her
Yes,
axe.
yes, yes.
And my sword.
God love my husband, because when it was airing last year and he was working, and so I would wake him up at like 5 in the morning and be like, we're
Oh my
watching this
gosh.
before you, because I was like, he wanted to watch it with me, but I was like, I'm not waiting all day to watch it. So
That's the worst scenario. I had to torture myself and wait a couple days to watch Andor to watch it,
Yeah.
watch the new released episodes with my husband. Like, get here.
I would have to wake him up with like a cup of coffee, and I'm like, I'm so sorry, I'm turning it on now.
That's dedication.
Yeah. So that one, I've been rewatching Santa Clarita Diet, which I love.
I love that show.
Yeah. I'm so bummed.
Underrated.
It's so underrated, and like Timothy Oliphant is one of my favorite actors.
Mhm.
And I love Drew Barrymore. I'm an Ever After girl from the 90s.
Same.
Yeah. So, and it's like it kind of ends on a cliffhanger, which normally is a deal breaker for me. I don't rewatch shows that end on a cliffhanger, but
I think we can blame it on Netflix, not
I
the
absolutely
writing of
blame
the
it on
show.
Netflix.
Mhm.
But the creator of the show was like, this is how we were going to do season 4, and this is where it was going to go. And I was like, okay, so it wasn't going to have like a sad ending or anything. It was
Right.
just going to be like, Joel and Sheila being zombies together. And I was like, all right, fair enough. Kind of has some closure. And I think that's something that I just kind of miss in fiction, is like, and I've asked this before online, I'm like, recommend me something where there's a married couple who don't divorce or cheat or die and make it to the end of the show side by side.
Cannot
And
compute.
you get like 3 recommendations, right?
Yeah.
And I've seen them all. So like A Discovery of Witches, Outlander, Santa Clarita Diet, and it kind of ends there. Drives me absolutely bonkers.
It's really weird how much TV like hinges on couples
buildup.
can't have tension other than breaking up. Like that's the
Or
only
she
type of
dies in his
tension that
arms and you're
exists.
like, what the shit, man?
Yeah.
Yeah. There was, because I even like, I'll start a show and they'll be like, season 1 will end great. And this has happened to me at least 5 times now, where season 1 ends great and they're together and it's hopeful. And then season 2 just shoots it completely in the foot. And I'm like,
Have you ever watched Bob's Burgers? Because those two love each other.
that is my husband's favorite show.
Okay.
And I have seen every episode at least 45 times. Bob and Linda are fantastic.
Yeah.
And it's funny because I used to be really, really, really turned off animated TV because my experience with it was things like Family Guy. And I'm like, it's so mean-spirited. I don't like things where one person in the relationship is like super mean. And like that goes both ways. Like when I see like the wife putting down the husband or the husband putting down the wife or being like, oh, you're stupid or oh, you're a ball and chain. I'm like, why are you together? So it really turned me off animated shows for years. And then he got me into Bob's Burgers and I was like, oh, supportive marriage. I like it.
Super supportive. It's so cute watching them when they just like love how nerdy they both are.
Yeah. Oh, there was another one recently as well. And we watched all of it. So it was 1923. And I don't know if you've seen it. I can't recommend it because
this is an animated show or what is it?
No. So this is, Yellowstone.
Oh, okay.
So
it's an
it was
offshoot of that.
Yeah, so the Yellowstone's like the modern one, and then they did like 1883, which is like where the cowboys and Native Americans have their story, and then they get to the 1923, which is like, set in Prohibition. And season 1 I quite liked. It's got Harrison Ford, it's got Helen Mirren, and all the romances were like super great. And season 2 was just like, hold my beer. I'm going to ruin every single one. And we got about 4 episodes in and just went, no, this is just like misery porn. Like, what is the point of this? Yeah, so can't recommend it. The season 1 was fantastic. If you just watch season 1, it's great. Harrison Ford is fantastic. But yeah, season 2, can't. Jesus Christ. Like... I hate that. Like, and I think this is another frustrating thing that I found with books and shows in general is it's like people think that they're being like new and edgy and, look at my twist by like killing off everybody or like, killing one half of the happy couple or whatever. And I'm like, look, it was kind of shocking.
Everyone's always trying to chase that Game of Thrones effect. Like they're all shows are trying to imitate Game of Thrones in some way, shape, or form. I feel like to try and get that level of viewership and fandom. And I always compare everything to that just because I don't know of another show that recently has had that level of huge success and fandom. But it feels like other shows are always trying to get that like huge shock factor and they do it so poorly. And it's like, you can't always just be like, we're going to do our own red wedding thing. And it's like, no, do your own thing. Don't do another red wedding. Like we don't need any more red weddings.
Not to mention the fact that I can't think of a single person that thought Game of Thrones ended well.
Bingo.
Like, I mean, they started so strong. And I see my favorite characters were Ned, Robb, Renly, and Oberyn.
That's a rough time.
Rough time. Really rough time.
So I got through the Robb and Renly part, and my husband really loved Oberyn. And we got to the head popping scene and just went, no, we're done. But what frustrates me is like so many people think that they're like, oh, the only way to have a good epic fantasy now is to like, have so much violence and so much gore and so much weird sexual assault that just seems like it's shoehorned in for absolutely no reason to the plot. And then I love when they're like, oh, that's historically accurate. Yo, it's a story about dragons. Don't even try that with me.
How can it be so historically accurate if dragons didn't exist?
Yeah, but like, and I think people forget, it's like everyone loves to say, Tolkien was like their inspiration. One member of the Fellowship dies.
Yeah.
One. Boromir. Like Gandalf comes back to life and everybody else, like, yeah, it's like a bittersweet ending, but everyone, gets to go home at the end.
Rebecca, these are major spoilers for Lord of the Rings.
For Lord of the Rings.
How dare you?
This is my fairly new work. Sorry, listeners.
30-year spoilers.
God, Gandalf. Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Sorry if I've spoiled Lord of the Rings for you guys. But it is kind of, it does seem like everyone nowadays is like, they lean so far into like, and this is not to like hate on the grimdark genre. It's just, I feel like people have equated all epic fantasy with being grimdark. And I'm like, no, like if you want to sign up for that, that's cool. It's its own separate genre, but an epic fantasy story doesn't have to destroy everything just to be good.
Yeah.
That's one of my biggest pet peeves.
It is
Well,
weird to have everything fall back on realism. Like, it's like, what?
right.
I feel like
Yeah.
it's weird to be like, do you want to know the most unrealistic thing? A woman was not raped on the page. Like, excuse you?
Right.
Like, yeah.
Right, like, and I've seen people being like, oh well, I don't like Lord of like the new Rings of Power show because they're like, oh my gosh, there's no sex and there's not really a whole lot of violence, and like there was like a whole big thing where initially in season 2, so again, spoiler alert, if you haven't seen it, skip ahead. But Mirdanya, the elf chick who has not a happy ending. And that I thought that was brutal how they did that. But initially they were gonna have it where like the orc like saws her head off and then like licks her skull. And then if you read in the books, like Sauron puts Celebrimbor up on a flagpole and like carries his body through. And the directors were like, it was dark enough.
Right.
We didn't need to really go. So they took out the orc head licking scene and they toned down. I thought Celebrimbor's death was really gruesome anyway.
It was, and it was very tragic.
It was so I cried. But I do think there's a level to which like you can have an epic, heartbreaking show and still be able to watch it with a 12-year-old. Like you don't need to have everything become like I'm sorry, but like Game of Thrones hiring porn stars to have in the background just to have more boobs is like, come on, you know what you're doing. Like it's unnecessary. Like,
yeah. Well, Rebecca, wrapping it up, where can people find you and your works online, or where can we find your works in stores?
So I have everything's up on Amazon, or for ebooks, you can get them all on Itch, which I like the website. It has got to have a better name. I was saying that to other indie authors. They're like, Itch, really? I'm like, I know it's not my name. But or like I suppose some people call it Itch.io, but that doesn't sound
it's
a whole lot.
Itch.io. Is it the same thing? Okay.
Yeah, it's not a whole lot better. It's like, yeah, it started out as like an indie gaming website. And it's a great website, just not the best name I've heard. Some of them you can get the paperbacks on Barnes and Nobles,
Cool.
and through Waterstones I've seen. You can find me on all the book spotlight pages. The only thing I will say is there is someone who copied my name and you changed it to his domain name. So because my blog is just Rebecca Crunden, and he took my name, Indie Book Spotlight, and bought the indiebookspotlight.com domain and changed that to his Bluesky handle, and then followed everyone I was following and then blocked me. So that kind of pissed me off. But if you look online, there's a whole writers beware article on him, and he's got like 25 websites that all demand money. So if it demands money, it's not me.
Okay.
Yeah,
good to know.
Yeah,
but you were at Indie Book Spotlight online, correct?
Yeah, so most of my usernames are just Book Spotlight.
Okay.
I had to change it for Instagram and Threads because my old account got purged, and they were like, oh, to get back into your Book Spotlight account on Instagram, send us a photo of your face for identification or something. And I was like,
how did they know what your face looked like before to confirm?
Well, because my account was just pictures of books. I was like, I don't have a picture of my. Yeah, it was so weird. And I also didn't really feel like sending, Mark Zuckerberg my face. He doesn't need that. So on Instagram and Threads, I'm Indie Book Spotlight just as like a thing. But honestly, if you just go to my blog, all my links are there. But yeah, if it asks for money, it's not me.
Yeah. Well, thank you for letting us know. Everyone go follow Rebecca's works, go buy things. Thank you so much again for coming on.
Yes. This was a great discussion.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. We feel so honored that we're your first podcast. We hope it's the first of many. So
Well, this is fun.
It's good to rip the Band-Aid off.
Right.
Well, listeners, you know where to find us at OWWR Pod on all the social platforms in which we are available. And join us next week as we get back to the Year of the Dresden. So
more Dresden Files. More. So much.
It'll be a time. We are covering book 7, so the first third of that book. So be ready, all.
Crying already.
All right. Bye.
Bye.
Bye, guys.